My name is Ethan Blake. I am a park ranger in a remote forest called Darkwood. I have only been working here for 3 months, but already I have heard strange stories. People say Darkwood is haunted. They say weird things happen at night. Some people disappear. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was just small town gossip, but I was wrong. Darkwood is big. It is full of old trees, deep rivers, and fog. It feels quiet, too quiet sometimes. My job is simple. I check the trails, make sure campers are safe, and keep an eye on the wildlife. But something about this forest makes me nervous every day. I feel like someone is watching me. There is one place in the forest called the Silent Glade. It is deep in the park, far from the regular hiking paths. No one ever goes there. The other rangers avoid it. They say bad things happen there. One ranger even warned me, stay away from the Silent Glade. People who go there don't come back. I laughed, but now I'm not so sure. Yesterday, I found a strange symbol carved into a tree near the Silent Glade. It looked like a circle, with sharp lines through it, like an eye. I asked around, but no one knew what it was. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept dreaming of the symbol. It was like it was calling me, pulling me in. The next day, I went back to the tree with the symbol. I wanted to see if I could find more clues. As I stood there, a cold wind blew through the trees. Even though it was summer, the leaves rustled, and I felt that same feeling again, like someone was watching me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. I told myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. Closer this time. I called out, "Who's there?" But there was no answer, just silence. I could feel my heart racing. Then, I heard a voice. It was soft, almost like a whisper. It said, "Leave this place." My skin crawled, and I took a step back. I looked around, but I still couldn't see anyone. The voice came again, "Leave now, before it is too late." I didn't need to hear it a third time. I turned and ran back to my station. My hands were shaking, and I could barely catch my breath. What was that voice? Was someone playing a trick on me? Or was it something else? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to find out. That night, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the wind or maybe an animal. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't alone in Darkwood. The next morning, I got a call from my boss, Ranger Davis. He sounded serious. "Ethan, we have a problem," he said. "A camper went missing last night. We need to search for them." My stomach dropped. Missing in Darkwood. It didn't feel right. I met Davis and the other rangers at the edge of the forest. They told me the camper's name was Lisa Quinn. She had been hiking alone, but her family hadn't heard from her in 2 days. Her last known location was near the Silent Glade. My heart sank. The Silent Glade again. The place everyone warned me about, but I couldn't refuse. We split into groups and began the search. As we walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew closer, and the light dimmed. It felt like the forest was closing in on us. After hours of searching, I found something, a backpack. It was lying on the ground, covered in dirt and leaves. I knelt down and opened it. Inside, I found a map and a journal. The journal belonged to Lisa. The last entry caught my eye. It said, "Something is following me. I don't know what it is, but I feel it watching me. I am scared." My hands started shaking again. I called Davis on the radio and told him what I found. He told me to stay put and wait for him. But as I stood there, I felt that cold wind again. The same feeling from before. The same feeling of being watched. Suddenly, I heard something rustling in the bushes. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. I whispered to myself. What's going on here? By the time Davis arrived, it was nearly dark. We went through the backpack together, but it didn't give us any more clues about where Lisa might be. We decided to head back and regroup with the others. As we walked, the forest seemed to grow even darker. Then we heard a distant scream. It was faint, but it was definitely a scream. My heart pounded as we ran toward the sound. The scream came again, louder this time. It was coming from deeper in the forest, near the silent glade. When we reached the glade, we stopped. The scream had stopped too. Everything was silent to silent. I shined my flashlight around, searching for any sign of Lisa. That is what I saw it. In the middle of the glade, there was a circle of stones. In the center of the circle, something was moving. I stepped closer, my heart in my throat. And then I saw it, Lisa's jacket, lying on the ground. But there was no sign of Lisa herself. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked up, and for a split second, I saw something in the trees. A figure. It was tall, shadowy, and its eyes glowed in the dark. I blinked, and it was gone. Did you see that? I asked Davis, but he just shook his head. See what? He replied. I didn't answer. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I knew one thing. It was not human. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I saw in the glade. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, but something deep inside me knew it was real. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to that circle of stones. That afternoon, I decided to go back to the silent glade alone. Davis didn't want me to go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to. I packed my bag and headed into the forest. As I approached the glade, the wind picked up, and the trees seemed to whisper around me. I stepped into the clearing and saw the stones again, but this time there was something different. Symbols had been carved into the ground around the stones. They looked ancient, like something out of a nightmare. I knelt down to get a closer look. Then I heard the whispering again. But this time, it was clearer. It wasn't just the wind. It was voices, hundreds of voices, all whispering at once. I backed away, my heart racing. I knew I shouldn't be here. I turned to leave, but as I did, something caught my eye. A shadow moving in the trees. I froze, staring at it. The shadow moved closer, but I couldn't make out its form. All I could see were those glowing eyes. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the ground. The whispers grew louder, following me through the trees. I didn't stop until I was back at the ranger station, my breath coming in gasps. Whatever is in the silent glade, it is not human, and I have a feeling it is not done with me yet. The next few days were a blur. More campers went missing. The other rangers were on edge. But no one wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to admit that something was wrong, but I knew. I could feel it. The forest was alive, and it was hunting us. One night, I was on patrol when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see another ranger, but there was no one there. I kept walking, but the footsteps followed me. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps grew louder, closer. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart raced, and I started running. The footsteps followed, getting louder and louder. I ran deeper into the forest, not caring where I was going. All I wanted was to get away. I stumbled into a clearing and fell to my knees. The footsteps stopped. I looked up and saw the circle of stones again, but this time something was different. A figure stood in the center of the circle, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It stepped forward, and I could see its face. It wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost gray, and its eyes burned with an unnatural light. It smiled at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Welcome, Ranger," it said, its voice a cold whisper. "You have come at last." I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place, and my heart pounded in my chest. The figure stood before me, tall and terrifying. Its smile was wide and unnatural, stretching too far across its pale face. I tried to speak, but no words came out. "You shouldn't have come here, Ethan," it said, its voice soft but cold, like a knife in the dark. "You have seen too much. Now you belong to the forest." I stumbled back, finally able to move, but my legs felt weak. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head, studying me. "The forest is hungry. It demands sacrifice. Those who enter the silent glade never leave. It is the way of things." I shook my head, backing away slowly. "No, I won't stay. I won't." Before I could finish, the air around me grew colder. The trees seemed to close in, their branches twisting and reaching toward me. The figure stepped closer, its eyes glowing brighter. "You cannot leave, Ethan. You are part of this now." I turned and ran, my feet slipping on the damp ground. The shadows seemed to move with me, following me through the trees. I could hear the figure's voice in my head, whispering terrible things. "The forest is alive. It watches you. It knows your fears." The whispers grew louder as I ran. The forest seemed endless, and no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the sound of the figure's voice. My legs ached, and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. The air was thick with fog, and the trees loomed over me, like silent watchers. I looked around, trying to figure out where I was, but nothing looked familiar. The forest had changed. It was as if the path had disappeared. Panic rose in my chest. I reached for my radio, but it was dead. No signal. I was alone. Completely alone. Then I heard it, a soft rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart skipped a beat. I forced myself to my feet, my eyes scanning the shadows. The rustling grew louder, closer, and then silence. I stood frozen, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the silence was worse. It was suffocating, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. And then I saw it, a shape in the fog. It was small, hunched over, barely visible through the mist. I squinted, trying to make it out, and realized it wasn't just one shape. There were several. They were moving slowly toward me. I backed away, my hands shaking. "Stay away," I whispered, though I knew they couldn't hear me. The shapes kept coming, their movements slow and deliberate. They were no longer hiding. I turned to run again, but this time, something caught my foot. I looked down and saw roots. Thick, dark roots, twisting around my legs, pulling me down. I struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter the roots wrapped around me. The shapes were getting closer. I could see their faces now. Pale, hollow, their eyes dark and empty. They were the missing campers, Lisa, and others I didn't recognize. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. It was as if they were trying to warn me, but it was too late. I thrashed against the roots, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare, but the cold grip of the roots felt too real. They were pulling me down into the earth, as the figures watched in silence. And then, a voice, that same voice from before. But now it was louder, sharper. The forest claims what is hers. The figures were close enough now that I could see the fear in their eyes. Even in death, they were afraid. They had been trapped, just like me. I struggled harder, pulling at the roots, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No, I screamed. I won't be part of this. Suddenly, the roots loosened, just enough for me to break free. I stumbled to my feet and ran. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that place, away from the figures, away from the silent glade. But no matter how far I ran, I could feel it. The shadow was still with me, still watching. The forest wasn't letting me go. I was running in circles, the trees closing in around me, the path disappearing before my eyes. And then I saw it again, the figure, standing in the distance, watching me, waiting, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I was exhausted, my body felt heavy, my legs weak. The figure was still there, waiting. I could hear the whispers again, louder this time, coming from the trees themselves. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. The forest was alive, and it wanted me. I tried to calm my breathing, but the fear was too much. I needed to think. I needed a way out. But every path I took led me back to the silent glade. It was as if the forest was playing with me, like a predator with its prey. Suddenly, I heard something new. A voice, not a whisper, but a real voice. Ethan, over here. I turned and saw Ranger Davis running toward me. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. Davis, I shouted, waving my arms. I am here. He reached me, out of breath, his face pale. We need to get out of here now, he said, grabbing my arm. I don't know what's happening, but this forest, it's not right. I nodded, and we started running together, back toward the ranger station. But as we ran, the trees seemed to move, the path twisted and changed, and soon, we were lost again. Davis cursed under his breath. This can't be happening. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us. I looked at Davis, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. We need to keep moving, he said, his voice shaking. We can't stop. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest wasn't going to let us go. We ran for what felt like hours, but the forest never ended. The trees loomed over us, dark and silent, their branches reaching out like claws. The whispers were everywhere now, louder, more insistent. And then, just ahead, I saw it. The silent glade. Again, we had come full circle. Davy stopped, his chest heaving. We can't keep running, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's playing with us. I nodded, my throat dry. What do we do? Davis looked at me, his eyes filled with dread. I think it wants a sacrifice. I stared at him, not understanding. What do you mean? He pointed to the circle of stones in the glade. It has been drawing us here. It wants something. Maybe if we give it what it wants, it will let us go. I shook my head, backing away. No, no way. I am not. I am not doing that. But Davy stepped forward, his face pale and haunted. We don't have a choice, Ethan. If we don't do something, we are never getting out of here. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The trees shook, and the whispers grew deafening. The forest was alive, and it was angry. Davis took another step toward the stones. I am sorry, Ethan, he said quietly. I think it has to be one of us. Before I could react, Davis grabbed me and shoved me toward the circle. I stumbled, falling to my knees. Inside the ring of stones, the whispers grew louder, and the air around me grew colder. Davis stood at the edge of the circle, his face twisted with guilt and fear. I am sorry, he repeated, his voice barely audible. I don't want to die. I couldn't believe what was happening. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Davis, my friend, my colleague, had betrayed me. He had pushed me into the trap. The forest wanted a sacrifice, and he had chosen me. The ground beneath me shook violently, and I could feel something rising from the earth. The shadows around the glade deepened, and I knew the end was near. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let the forest take me. I wasn't going to be another victim. I scrambled to my feet and lunged at Davis, knocking him to the ground outside the circle. The ground inside the circle began to crack open, and a dark, swirling mist rose from the earth. It reached for me, but I was no longer in its grasp. I stood over Davis, my chest heaving, as the mist swirled around him instead. Davis looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. Ethan, no, please. But it was too late. The mist wrapped around him, pulling him into the earth. His screams echoed through the forest, but there was nothing I could do. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the forest went silent. I stood there, trembling, watching as the mist swallowed Davis whole. The whispers were gone, the trees were still. The forest seemed to have returned to its quiet, eerie self. I didn't waste any time. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away from that place. The path before me was clear now, and for the first time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of the ranger station ahead. I stumbled out of the forest, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. I had made it. I had survived. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching me. It was waiting for the next one. Weeks passed, and I never spoke of what happened that night. The official report said Davis went missing during a routine patrol. The search party found nothing, and the case was eventually closed. But I knew the truth. The forest had taken him, just as it had taken the others before him. I quit my job as a ranger. I couldn't bear to go back to that forest, to the silent glade. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the memories, the whispers, the shadows. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear them. Faint, but they're calling me back. And I know, deep down, that one day, I will return. Because once the forest has you, it never really lets you go. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks.